Hello everyone, Coach Robert here with a video about calculation tips and tricks. This time I'm going to be talking about the principle of two ways, which is a phrase that I coined just now. The idea of the principle of two ways is that pieces such as knights, bishops, and rooks generally have at least two ways of accomplishing the same task in any position. In fact, for knights, bishops, and rooks in particular, they're usually capped at two ways to accomplish something. And for the king and the queen, they could actually have a higher number of ways to accomplish the same goal. So let's think about this in abstract. Let's say you have a white rook on a1 and you want to attack the e5 square on an empty board. You could easily move it up the board or across the board to accomplish that task. So even in a position that's crowded with other pieces, your pieces and your opponent's pieces, it's good to look out for two ways of accomplishing the same thing. The reason this has come up in my mind is that many students that I have met, they will come up with a good idea. They want to, maybe try to checkmate the king by attacking it directly with their minor pieces. And they'll find one way of accomplishing that task. And when it doesn't work, maybe because it can get captured, they will abandon that idea entirely. And I've also noticed that even strong players, they'll often be blinded to their alternatives. They'll see one idea and become fixated on it. And if it doesn't work, they just switch and try to find a new idea. Even players who are rated like 1700 will fall for this kind of psychological pitfall. So I think if you recollect the principle of two ways, that all pieces except for pawns have at least two ways, and for knights, bishops, and rooks, it's often exactly two ways to accomplish the same goal. You will always have at least two candidate moves that you should compare with each other when you are attempting to execute your idea. So let's see one example from when I was a beginner. I think this is a good place to start because it's very simple. I was playing black in this game. This was a scholastic game in high school, and it was one of my first competitive games. And this is your Budapest Gambit. And I chose this line where you play bishop b4 check, and my opponent blocked with the knight on d2. I put more pressure on the e-pawn with my queen, and after a3, this brings us to our critical moment. This is actually one move before the situation I want to discuss to illustrate the principle of two ways. So if you want, you can pause the video here and see if you can find black's most challenging move for white. Hopefully you had some time to think about it, because the move is some knight capture on e5. I prefer the knight on g4. And you might be wondering, well, what happens if they take the bishop if you didn't notice this move? And this brings us to the principle of two ways. See, knights have two ways of accomplishing the same task. So I'm going to prime you here and say that black's task in this position is to attack white's king. So pause the video, see if you can find two different ways of attacking the king with the knight, and choose which one you think is better. Try to have an idea in mind of why it's better. In this situation, we can both take on f3 and d3. And they're not equivalent. Sometimes I'll have a student and I'll show them a position like this, and they'll rush ahead and say knight takes f3 because it's check and it captures a piece. And then when I say, well, hold on, they could just take with the knight or the g-pawn, they'll say something like, oh, I thought they would want to take with the e-pawn, but they can't. I guess my idea is not good. And then they'll go back to this situation and play a move like knight takes b4. Some disaster move, not good moves. But if they slow down and remember the principle of two ways, they'll see that knight d3 is actually mate in one. It's the same idea that they had. They just had to see more different ways of executing it. And here, because it's a knight, there are only two ways to even consider. So this is an easy way to enhance your calculation if you have a hard time spotting candidate moves that are similar to each other, that have a similar purpose. So this is a really easy example. So let's see an example from a classic game. So here I have the Evergreen game, which is Anderson versus Dufresne from 1851, I believe. And I found that there are two moments in this game that are both good examples of the principle of two ways. So the analysis and commentary on this game goes back for a very long time. People were really excited about this game when it first occurred. Kasparov has given comments on it in his My Great Predecessor series. So if you want to learn more about this game itself, I would recommend looking up those other sources because they're quite good and quite thorough. I'm going to focus just on the idea at hand here, that there are some situations in all games where you have two ways of executing the same idea. So fast forwarding here, d3 is not a very trendy move anymore. This is probably the last game where anyone attempted it in a serious way. And after some shuffling and developing of the pieces, and this dubious b5 sacrifice from black, we reach our main position. Okay, so this is the first moment that I want to discuss here. And it's similar in spirit to the last example. If I prime you with the goal that we want to attack black's king, because all of our forces are ready except this rook on a1, you'll start to consider ways of attacking the king and evaluate them. So here we have two main options, knight f6 and knight d6. So before you go forward, you should really analyze these options if you want to attack the king. There's two ways, so compare the two. You can pause the video here and see which one you like more. Now, I think that many people would say, of course, the move that they played in the game is the right move that you should play, because this is such an amazing, outstanding game. Kasparov's commentary about this position is something to the tune of, knight f6 is utterly unnecessary, but created one of the most beautiful combinations in chess history. So if you chose knight f6, you're in good company. But I do want to point out that knight f6 is not the only move. We'll see that because that happened in the game. But let's take a look at knight d6. Here, it's basically certain that they should take this. If they don't accept this offering of a knight, they're going to have a lost position either way, so this is critical. Pawn takes to open the file. This is the reason that we're even comparing these two things, because both knight f6 and knight d6 help us to attack the king on the open file. Now here, it's already getting difficult for black to find a defending move. So in that way, it's similar to knight f6. The way they would defend is probably by attempting to trade queens, if I had to guess. And white should probably not trade queens here. A move like rook takes e7 would be really snazzy if the queen was only protected by the knight, because they would have to use the knight probably and then lose their queen. But they have a bishop protecting the queen, so that's a moot point. So we should probably avoid that queen trade. Queen h4 puts pressure on e7. And if they play a move like queen takes a3, they get roasted pretty badly. For instance, rook takes e7, and if they take back, then queen takes e7. So once you start seeing these kinds of resources, it's apparent that knight d6 is a respectable and valid move, even when compared with knight f6. In fact, if we compare the two directly, like let's say we look a couple moves ahead and take this as our main position. This position is the same in spirit, except that the pawn is on f6, not d6. So if we just do a pros and cons comparison here, which is motivated by our principle of two ways, we see that with a pawn on d6, that pawn could be captured. That might be inconvenient. It also blocks our bishop on a3. However, with a pawn on f6, we've opened the g file for black, which allows them this counterplay with rook g8, which is what happened in the game. So in an objective sense, you might even say that knight d6 is a superior move. And this is just when we're considering the two ways to accomplish the same goal. There are other good moves for white here. One other good move is knight g3. But knight g3 doesn't fall into the category of my principle of two ways, because this is actually a separate goal entirely. If we're playing knight d6 and knight f6, these are two ways to attack the e8 square. That's one goal, okay? Knight g3 has a different goal, is to hunt down and chase and trap the queen, or at least win some material in the process. And you can look into the analysis of this on your own if you're curious. So here there are two ways to attack e8, and it's good to compare them instead of just picking one and going with it. For instance, let's say you picked knight d6 and you're actually dissatisfied with it. It would be a shame to abandon this idea entirely here. You should probably check out knight f6 before you abandon the whole plan of attacking the king and opening the e-file. Okay, so going a little bit further in the game, black obtained some counterplay with rook g8, and this is where things get really spicy. White played rook a d1, which is, in my opinion, the most excellent move of the game. You'll see why in a moment. Here, black played queen takes f3, very tempting because it threatens mate, You cannot take that queen. And all of black's pieces appear harmonious except for black's king. And maybe you could talk smack on this rook on b8 as well. So the reason rook ad1 was such a great move is that in this position there's a combination that takes several moves to execute. If you are feeling frisky and want to pause the video to try to find it, or try to remember it if you've seen this game already, you could pause right here. It's white to play, and there is, in essence, a forced win. I think that if you are maybe around like 1700 or under, it could take you up to 15 minutes to solve this position. So the first move is kind of obvious in my opinion, because we are under threat of checkmate. And if we play a passive move like bishop f1, it really doesn't help matters. There's queen takes f2 and then queen g1. So we really need to do something fast here. Therefore, the only move that makes sense is rook takes e7. They should probably walk away from the rook. A move like this. But this still leads to a demolition derby. So let's focus on the move that they played in the game. Knight takes e7 is the most challenging in the sense that it requires white to play a move which they might find unsavory. Only with some accurate calculation they will decide to play this move. So far if you didn't guess rook takes e7, you might want to pause again here and see if you can guess white's move. It has the same idea behind it, that we really cannot allow an attack on g2. In fact, the bishop is now joining the fray, so we don't have options like g3 even. We're going to get roasted if we play any move that is not ultra aggressive. And therefore we should play queen takes d7. To me, this is not the best move of the game, because at this point you're sort of forced to play all of it. Rook ad1 setting up queen takes d7 is, in my opinion, the best. So anyway, king takes d7 is really forced, and this brings us to our main position for the purpose of illustrating the principle of two ways. Here, we would really like to attack their king. If we don't, we're busted. Lost position. But we have two ways to do it, because this is a bishop. We need to attack with the rook, but the bishop's in the way. So we're going to have to make some kind of clever bishop move, and we have multiple ways of doing the same thing. Take note that if we play a simple move like bishop f1 check, or bishop e2 check, it doesn't really matter. You know, one variation that tempts a lot of students, I think, is bishop e2 check, and they think, okay, I'm going to win this queen, looks really good, but they can actually block, and they're up so much material. You know, white sacrificed their queen for a pawn and everything. They could always give back a piece and keep the winning attack. So this is not good enough. We need to think of ways to attack the king on d7 with the bishop on d3. So identify the two ways and choose the one that you like more. Try to have that in mind before you resume this video and see the answer. Okay, so we could go on f5, or we could go on b5. These are the options that we have. Let me start with bishop b5. This move's incorrect. It's a double check, so they cannot take the rook, they can't do mate. That's all good. They even can't block, because you cannot block a double check. However, this move is incorrect because of the move king e6. Okay, maybe you were hoping they would go somewhere else and you would get an easy checkmate, but no. The king will run out in the open, where it's hard to hunt the king down with just two bishops and a rook. If we want to win with two bishops and a rook against the king, we need to get that king trapped against the edge of the board. Here, a sample way of trying to chase the king down might be like rook e1, king takes f6, bishop takes e7, but you see it's running out very quickly. And here, everything is under attack and losing and awful. Even g3 check is not working, because they can just take, and there's this extra pin. And there will be mate very soon. Okay, so bishop e5 is not it. It's bishop f5. And you would probably not find this out if you started with bishop b5 and then abandoned your thought process because it doesn't work. It's important to remember that you have two options. So the second option is much better, and this depends on a couple small details. One is that after king e8, the game ends in style. We'll see that in the game. The other detail that you need to keep in mind here is that after king c6, there's a mate in 1. And if you didn't spot this, feel free to pause the video and look for it. The move is bishop d7. A very funny looking checkmate with all the black pieces crowding in and blocking the king's escape. Okay, so in the game they played this one. We still give a check. And now it doesn't matter where they go. King f8 or king d8. Bishop takes e7 is mate. So this is a really cool game, and people have really been jazzed about it for a long time. I think this is a great example for this principle of two ways, because if you are practicing your calculation as you go through this classic game, and you struggle with the candidate moves, reminding yourself that knights, bishops, and rooks always have two ways will really help you to stay focused on your winning idea and not let it go until you've assessed all of the possible continuations. Alright, well, I hope you liked that, and until next time, good luck with your chess. Feel free to drop a comment if there's anything that you want to see, or if you just want to say hey. See ya.